Hi, everybody. Welcome to our September live chat. My name is Larissa. This channel is called Beekeeping Made Simple. And the purpose is to just do more of a live beekeeping Q&A, talking about what's going on with my bees and help you guys out as much as I can with what's going on with you. Nice to see the people that have already commented in the chat. If you have not yet and you're comfortable with it, I encourage you to just leave maybe where you're located, because sometimes people are able to connect that way and get to know other beekeepers from their area. I am going to be talking about the September tasks, which is really just the late summer beekeeping. It is not going well for my bees. It has been a terrible year, to be honest. I am very sad that I kind of don't even enjoy opening the hives at this moment. The bees, it's just been an interesting year from the start, just from them even coming in a month late. But I'll get a little bit more into that later. I'm going to be talking about dearth, which is a lack of food coming in, common this time of year. Last night it rained for the first time in I don't know how many weeks. The grass everywhere is brown, which leads to robbing. And talk about feeding. I have some feeders over here I want to show you. Feeders I like, feeders I don't like, all that fun stuff. I hate, though, that a lot of beekeeping is just talking about the bad stuff. So I'm going to try as much as possible to just talk about, things in a positive way, not just, yelling about all the problems that we see. All right. So first off, I want to thank the sponsor, Galena Farms, GALENA FARMS. If you're in, I'm going to write it in the chat. And if you are having trouble writing anything in the chat, it's probably because you're not logged into YouTube. And that's how it works. You can view chats without logging into YouTube, but you're going to have to log in if you want to put it in the chat. So Galena Farms is a company that sells beekeeping equipment. They are located in Ohio, and they really just focus on the woodenware of things. They are not like that one-stop shop that sells a bajillion things for the beekeeper, whether you need them or not, whether they're terrible or not. They sell made in the U.S. Amish-made bee boxes, which you'll see in some of my videos. The Eli and Ezra are my favorite. They're a really nice knot-free white pine that they use. And then they also sell the other, made overseas beehives that are the more affordable for people that are looking for that startup hive and not pay too much. Really nice people. I was just on a phone call with them recently. And, they're not, they just know wood, they know construction, and how to make a good quality product. I also have one of their styrofoam hives, and I am really curious to see how that hive overwinters. I'm not wrapping any of my hives over the winter. I'm in Pennsylvania. It's not terribly cold that it's necessary. And so I will talk in the springtime about how that hive did in that insulated hive that they have. I've been finishing up on the mural behind me. I deleted some stuff because I am a perfectionist and I couldn't stand some of the things I put in. So I just put in that ladybug this afternoon to finish up some of that stuff, put up some curtains. I just bought this table behind me for $15 at that Habitat for Humanity Restore. I'm going to put a mosaic on it. Something I don't really talk about was my past life before beekeeping. I have a bachelor's degree in graphic design, and I loved painting and drawing and art when I was a kid. I loved making mosaics. I used to make mosaics out of things I found on the street in Philly. I have one made from on a hubcap, and I had one that I really loved made from a stove burner I found. You find the weirdest things on the street in Philadelphia. So I haven't made a mosaic in a very long time. The last one was like a 4-foot by 3-foot starfish I made in Hawaii a few years ago. But I'm planning to make one on this table. So you'll see This is one piece. Hopefully, it won't take too many years before that finishes. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll make a mosaic YouTube channel and a beekeeping channel. All right. So feel free to post in the comments questions you have. I will get to them as I go from topic to topic. And don't be offended if I don't get to it right away, but I will try my best to get to them as I can. So it is, I am in southeastern Pennsylvania. It is nowhere near as cold here as it is in western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. People in Ohio, which is just one state over, get a hell of a worse winter than we do. But that being said, it does snow a handful of times probably, but it's under like a foot. Usually. I did spend the last 11 years in Hawaii, so my memories of winters are a little foggy, but I was here for the last one. And so right now I'm really just going through my checklist of what needs to be done for winter, making sure that I have the time to build what I need to build, or purchase what needs to be purchased. I mean, I saw last year that Varroa strips, which is oxalic acid, but in the strips, which is a little bit easier to administer than a vaporizer or the dribble method. Those were sold out. The only ones you could find were like the big boxes that were way too much for someone that has under 5 hives and, a lot more money, which seems, a shame to have to buy so much when you don't need it. So I'm, having trying to get that plan into place, and it is very dry. There are flowers blooming. I'm seeing the goldenrod, which is a big nectar source for bees this time of year. Um, and there's still clover everywhere. The mountain mint is still blooming. I had not seen the bees on the marigolds until recently, so I don't know if they're getting desperate. I did see this week a yellow jacket jump on top of a honeybee while they were both at the same plant and like start attacking it. And the honeybee was just like trying to get away and eventually like crawled away and left. Which was, I don't quite know what was going on there. If the yellow jacket was like, this is my plant, lay off, or if they were actually trying to like eat the honeybee, because wasps are carnivorous. I'm not sure. But it's getting cooler out. It's usually in the 50s and the 70s in the daytime, Fahrenheit, 50s in the evening. So there's a lot less flowers blooming, which means what we call dearth could potentially be in the area, which is a lack of food. And so I have put syrup into my hives, and really it can be tricky right now because you have this two three things that you could potentially be needing to do for your bees. You might look into your hives and say, I hardly see my queen laying. And the way that you can help her to encourage her to lay a little bit more is to feed them syrup in a ratio of 1 part sugar to 1 part water. And what this will do is help encourage the queen to lay more because it simulates a nectar flow. However, if your beehive is on the light side and doesn't have a lot of honey, and you're concerned that you need to bulk up the honey, but the population seems okay, then you could feed them a ratio of 2 parts sugar to 1 part water to help just give them that extra food. So they don't have to work so hard to evaporate the moisture and just store it up in their cells. So one, they're not eating through their winter storage day to day right now to feed themselves, and then they can also increase the winter stores that they have, so that they have more in the hive and you don't have to feed them so much candy. Now, if you're seeing both, then personally, I would rather feed them the one-to-one syrup and increase the laying by the queen to increase the population than to increase the amount of honey in the hive, because this isn't really honey. This is just syrup that's in a thicker form. And that's really, I mean, you can always put candy into the hive, but you can't make more bees. But then there's also a robbing that also happens when there's a lack of food, robbing by wasps and robbing by other bees. And so you just want to be careful when feeding your bees that you do not cause a robbing frenzy to these hives. So if it's cooler out, if it's, I mean, I don't even really know what temperature exactly to give you for cooler out. But if your bees are taking the syrup fairly quickly, the syrup usually will spoil in about a week. So if it's not like too hot, you're not in Florida, and it's not like, like still like well above 85 and sunny out in the daytime, you don't have to add any supplements. And if you're seeing that the bees are taking it and finding and still getting to it, then you cannot add supplements and replace the feed every week. And you know, uh, not encourage so much robbing by adding that like amino boost and honeybee healthy and stuff like that. But I wanted to show you some of my feeders. Uh, so there are entrance feeders. Don't do that. I've never bought an entrance feeder. I fed my bees very little in Hawaii for a few reasons. Entrance feeders are no good. Don't buy them. They are, I would say, a waste of money. But you have a feeder like this one. This is the one from Galena Farms, which is a wooden feeder, and it has you fill up both sides or just one side with syrup, and it has this like slatted thing. They float in the syrup, so the bees come up through this hole in the center. So you put this on the very top of your uppermost box. The bees come up through the hole up here and get down to the syrup, and will stand on these slatted racks and access the syrup. I have used this one with good results. It's nice to be able to put a ton of syrup in the hive and not have to worry about going back out there in a few days to give them more. And then we also have this feeder. This one comes with it looks like a shim, really. And this would also go on the uppermost box, and you fill this up with syrup, and the bees go up inside this little center thing. They can also go through the corners, access the syrup this way, and you can fill it up the same way. But when it comes to a season, in the springtime, I don't worry about robbing. Even though there's a lack of food, I would say that the populations of a lot of the hives are so low and the season is so new that I don't really think a lot of the beehives are on other hives' radar. But it's the fall and the late summer when I prefer to use a closed container as a feeder. So you can use, I see in a lot of YouTube videos where people are more on the commercial end or sideliner beekeepers, they will use like half-gallon buckets and stuff. But if you just have a few hives, you can get like a 32-ounce jar, or even the shorter jars, the 16-ounce jars, and you fill up the jar with syrup. It's really important to fill it up all the way because that's how the vacuum works. And I take a nail that we use to assemble a frame. So it's very small nails, and poke some holes in the lid, and then you suspend it, like this. The one I have is in one of my beehives, but it actually holds 4 of these jars inside the hive, and it elevates it, about a half an inch or so up above the frames, so you don't have to worry about the jars falling over, and the bees can access all of the holes right here. And so I prefer these feeders at any time when you think that there might be robbing going on, late summer, fall being really the time, because the bees can access this. But I think it really cuts back on the smells so that bees from other hives aren't going to be getting to this. And then another thing, if you are using an inner cover and you have one of those feeders like I showed you that's like this big open container, you really want to be careful and make sure that you don't have an inner cover that has a notch open, so that that is another entrance that bees could be getting to your feeder from other hives, and your bees wouldn't even know it really. You would just be feeding the neighborhood bees with that notch in your inner cover underneath your telescoping outer cover and right over this giant feed. So we just want to be careful when you're putting the boxes back on your hive. Double check to make sure no boxes are like a little askew, so that you don't have these extra gaps around the hive that robbers can get into. And if it's not too warm out, you're not seeing bearding around the hive in the daytime or the evenings, then you can also reduce the entrance. Entrance reducers are pretty cheap, but you can also just use a piece of wood. And this size entrance is a good entrance when you are concerned about robbing and it's not too warm out, and also you're not seeing like a ton of activity at the entrance. If you're seeing that the bees are using this entrance, then you can leave it open all the way. You really just have to use your best judgment when it comes to things like this. There's no one right or wrong answer, and there's no one specific date that you do this at. And of course, if you're in the southern states and you're in areas where it is still warm out, you're in Hawaii, Florida, Georgia, then you're going to be well behind me in this process. For me, I also have my mite testing kit. Ooh. This year, I actually bought this guy. I used to make my own Varroa mite kit, but I decided to spend the $20 on one because I don't know. I'm a grown up now. And I just decided to spend $20 instead of make something myself for some reason. And this is a really good time to just test for mites. This is a really important time to see if the treatment you used worked, and to see if an intense amount of robbing is bringing a whole lot of mites to your hive really quickly. Because formic acid, although it's supposed to be on the hive for an extended period of time, it does penetrate through the beeswax capping of the brood. And so even having that on for 3-4 days, if your hive is just like really having a high amount of varroa mites for whatever reason, can really do wonders and can really be what saves your hive, and make sure that the winter bees that are developing in your hive are healthy and not having this varroa mite, this parasite feeding off of their fat body. Now, one of my hives, my favorite hive, I'm still very sad about this, lost their queen. I have never had this happen. But there's a first time for everything that I'm aware of. That everything was fine is not really a time of year when to expect bees to swarm. I don't believe that they swarm, but there were over 8 queen cells in the hive, no sign of a queen, no sign of eggs, and she was doing so well my last inspection. I don't know if she flew off or if she got squished. I've never experienced my queen getting squished while checking a hive, but I have numerous times seen a queen fly off. I've just magically seen it and found her and put her back in the beehive. So anyway, I have a hive that is that was recently requeened, and so their population is low. And so I do have powdered sugar for a mite test for the hive that has a low population. Now, the rubbing alcohol or windshield washer fluid um, is will give you the most accurate results for a mite test, but it does kill the bees in the test. So since the hive has a low population, I still want to just make sure at the very least, like if you use powdered sugar and your results are high, then you have a high mite level. If your results are low, then your mite level might be low, or it might be just on that threshold. Now, I usually like to add like one or two to the results to my mite test using the powdered sugar. And in humid areas, this powdered sugar does not work well. It clumps really easily. And if there's any water, if you have a frame that has like open cells of nectar and a couple drops of nectar fling out of the cells, it's going to make your powdered sugar clump up, and you're going to get like your results are going to be useless. So I'm not a big fan of the powdered sugar. I'd rather just do what I need to do to like find out how to help my bees and keep the colony alive and not sweat so much about the sampling of bees that dies with the rubbing alcohol. But if your colony is small, your population is small, then the powdered sugar might be the way to go. And really, it's I don't want to merge them with another hive if they have a Varroa mite infestation. You know, it's like I'm not helping the other hive by doing that. So I like to know what I'm working with before I make too many decisions for my bees. Um, when you're doing a mite test, the instructions that come with this easy Varroa check are terrible. Like, I don't know how they expect someone to know what to do after reading those directions. I like to use a measuring cup. Like, you need a half cup measuring cup. You can't just, there's a line in here to show you where the sampling of bees needs to come up, but you don't want to use that line. Bees are like flying out of the cup. You want to get a half cup measuring cup, and ideally you shake the frame into a container that has like rounded edges so that it's a little bit easier to take this measuring cup and scoop the bees out. If you use something that has these really tight little corners, you might not get enough bees, and you really want this measuring cup to be overflowing with bees because they're all flying out of your measuring cup. So you want a heaping half a cup of bees, accounting for so many that are going to be flying away. This came with little kitty popsicles that I had bought, this funnel, and I use this and a paper towel, put the paper towel over the funnel, and then I pour the rubbing alcohol back into the bottle so I can reuse the alcohol and it doesn't get wasted. So before I talk a little bit more, I just wanted to check out the comments in the chat. And thank you to everyone that's posted in the comments. Feel free to say hi to people that are in areas similar to you. Dance Camp says, hi, Jimmy from Sacramento, California. Wondering if folks have a recommendation for a good but inexpensive honey harvester for someone with one hive. The Weaver gave me that one hive, that one extractor, and it worked well. I like that it had the variable speed, which is really helpful, especially if you're using foundationless frames. It's a real pain in the butt to take apart to wash. Like, it was a two-person thing. My husband had to like hold it down while I put the bolts back on. I mean, honestly, it's really easy to harvest honey using the crush and strain method. You just need a 5-gallon bucket that has a spout and a sieve, a strainer that fits a 5-gallon bucket, the round ones. The only thing is that you are squishing the comb in it. So if you want to save all of that comb and you want to use an extractor, then the Weaver ones are pretty good. I am not a fan of the hand crank. They are a real pain. I just Even with one hive, I do not want to crank those things. So I would prefer to go with the electric ones. The nice thing about the ones that are a little bit more expensive, you'll find on the beekeeping supply sites, is sometimes you'll also see some spare parts that are for sale so that you can fix some of the more common things that break on them, as opposed to the ones that are a couple $100. But once it's broke, it's broke. Because those extractors, they're really big, but they're a drum and they use centrifugal force. So if it arrives dented or gets dented at any point, there's a potential that it won't work. Um, those things aren't really ideal. A lot of bee clubs also have extractors and an extraction day where everyone just comes out with their frames and takes turns extracting too. Um, Keith says, hard to beat the little 2 or 4 frame hand crank weavers for a small operation. Yeah, they are pretty cheap. The one I had made a video about, there's a video on my YouTube channel. If you go to the search bar, I show you what my issue is with the extractor and what it looks like. The two frame would definitely be sufficient, but they also have the 4 frame one. Let's see. Radis. This is my first year having bees. I have 3 hives. Helped me a lot. One hive was robbed before I could start feeding them, but it seems all fine now. That's good. There's robbing is going to happen throughout the year, and Bee Source does make a robbing screen. I have one of my most recent videos is about robbing. I have a link to it there. The robbing screen is white. Let me see if I can put in the video. I mean the link to it. I will put the link to this in the comments. Here's a link to the robbing screen. If you just type into Google. It says the link is too long. All right, well, if you put robbing screen and then Bee Source, BEESOURCE, into any search engine, it will come up with this screen. It's white, and it really just allows ventilation but closes off the hive to robbers, but has this upper part where you can open it up a little bit to let the robbers out but doesn't let other bees in. It's not foolproof, and you're gonna have to sit there and operate it, but it is in really bad cases of robbing. Otherwise, putting things like a wet sheet or wet towel that kind of drapes over the entrance, that really just confuses the robbers and masks the smells, can often stop whatever robbing is happening, and of course decrease the entrance to a very small little space. Karen says, with Jimmy with one hive, I wouldn't mess with a harvester extractor. It's expensive, and then you have to store it. I'd wait until you have 7 or more hives. That is true. I had over 20 hives, and I still didn't have an extractor. I was harvesting mostly comb honey. And the hotel I kept bees for, they had 4 hives, and they had an extractor. They got a lot of honey from their bees, though. And with those 4 hives, it was definitely helpful because we were harvesting 1 to 2 boxes per hive. But otherwise, with one hive, an extractor is not really necessary unless you really just want to save that comb and not have to squish it. Simon says, I finished just over 4 weeks of Varroa mite treatment with Apiguard. I did a 24-hour sticky board test and counted 4 mites. Should I do 2 more weeks of treatment? Let's see. Apiguard is supposed to be in the hive for 4 weeks. So no, I would now, when you did the treatment, there are 2 ways you can do the treatment. You can put it in for the half tray, and you can do a half tray every week. Or you can do a full tray and you can put that in for 2 weeks and then take that tray out and put another full tray in for 2 weeks. And when you do that, when you are replacing it with the new tray, is the tray empty or is the tray all dried up? Because that'll give you an idea of like what the problem was. Because Abogard should have killed a whole lot more mites than that. Now, sticky boards do not give you an accurate mite count. It's really just up to chance. What's going on in your hive that's causing these mites to fall? You could get a 0 mite count, and then you could get a 4 mite count within hours, and it's just not as accurate as doing the mite test with the rubbing alcohol where you shake a sampling of bees. I would actually even do powdered sugar in a mite test with a half a cup of bees over using the sticky board. And also, there's just so much junk that falls on that sticky board that kind of looks like a mite. So you really just want to be sure that you're like really seeing those little legs and that they are mites. But the apogard messes with the pheromones of the queen and can really slow down the laying. So, and it really just disrupts the hive. All of those things that use the strong smells are very disruptive to the hive. And that's why treatments like Apovar are so popular. It's a synthetic chemical. It's less ideal in every single way, except it's just the bees do not seem to care that it is there. The queen will still lay eggs on either side of the strip. The bees walk by it, and these other treatments, it just like it causes tons of bearding and fanning and messes with the queen's pheromones. You can potentially go queenless or they abscond, and things like Apovar, it just doesn't happen. So with Apogard, I I am not positive, but on their instructions, they might say you can potentially do another 2 week treatment to 6 weeks, but I'm not positive on that. This is just a tricky time to have Apogard in your hive for so long, so I would not. Um, you could do a vaporizer or some kind of treatment of oxalic acid, or you could do just like a 3-day treatment of formic acid to really just like try to get like whatever mites are in that hive at that time. Um, you could monitor it to see if there's extensive robbing going on. Maybe you need to decrease the entrance and put like a sheet over it, or take the feed out of the hive. And you just like, I just wouldn't keep the Apogard in for too long. But first, just do a quick search to see if you can have the Apogard in for 6 weeks, according to, I forget the name of the company that makes the Apogard. But it's a possible option. But if your population is low, if your queen isn't laying so much, I would go with a treatment that's not going to continue to disrupt that for another 2 weeks, because uh, it's just really not ideal for the hive. But that is interesting that the Apogard didn't bring down the population, the Varroa mites, that much. Sal says 2 weeks for the first application and 2 to 4 weeks for the second treatment. But the question is like, that second treatment, was there still a lot of the Apogard in the tray, or was it empty? And like, did you throw out a half empty tray that could have been in there for another 2 weeks? But first, I would really just do a mite test with the rubbing alcohol to get an accurate reading of what your mites are. And then 2, I would just look at the population. If the queen is still laying and the Apogard did not affect the queen too much, and you have a decent population, and then you could put like a half a tray in for another week or a full tray in for another 2 weeks. Otherwise, I would go with like an oxalic acid or a formic acid, just like a quick little um, thing, as opposed to disrupting the hive for so long. Because in the springtime, you can get away with that, but right now, you really don't want your queen to stop laying for so long. You should. When I put the apple guard, whatever it's called, into my hives this year, the bearding on the hives was insane. They were all outside. I could smell it from like a good 10 feet away. They were at the entrance, fanning their wings like crazy. I was afraid they were going to abscond. Okay, next question. Neo 314, Varroa sand strips. I keep hearing that Varroa sand strips will only maintain the mite population rather than significantly reduce it. Is it hard to imagine that is true? Is that your experience? I have not used the Varroa sand strips yet because they came out when I was in the transition of moving. And so now this year, I considered buying them, but they were all sold out in the smaller quantities I needed. So I actually just I have a vaporizer, but just for the sake of trying it, I actually got one of those squirt bottles from Better Bee, and I am going to be dribbling it into Hive to see how that goes. I really hate using the vaporizer; it's a real pain in the butt. Um, but I have not heard that the Varoxan does that. It's really supposed to. Now, when people are saying that about Varoxan, I'm curious if they are saying that at a time when there is still like a high amount of brood in the beehive, because oxalic acid's primary use is in the late fall, before you close your hive up for winter. And at that time, there should be little to no brood present. And that is when you really just want to get rid of any remaining varroa mites in the hive so that they cannot continue to reproduce and take over the hive throughout the winter time. Um, so, really, no mite treatments should be just like, um, you know, lowering it a little bit. It should really be knocking out like over 90% of the mites in the hive. If it doesn't, then it's not really a mite treatment that should be used. I'm sorry, one second. I really just have to. There is this crazy noise. Sorry. Oh, my husband is tuning the piano. That's what you do at 8:30 on a Friday night when you have little kids. You tune your piano. And he's tuning the like highest keys on the piano right now, and it's just like making me cringe. I just can't. I'm like losing my train of thought as I am talking. Um so on topic of rock sand strips, they should be significantly reducing the population, or else that's something you do not want to be using before you close the hive up for winter and don't open it for months at a time. I have not heard that myself. If you happen to know where you read that, if you could put a link in the comments so we could look it up. But I don't have a ton of experience with oxalic acid because it is not incredibly effective when you have a lot of brood present, which is the case in Hawaii. And it wasn't that effective in the vaporizer method in high humid climates. So it was not really a recommended treatment in Hawaii. On top of the fact that nobody would ship me the oxalic acid, so my only option was to use the generic wood bleach that was at the hardware store, and that is not what you want to be using if you are going to be selling honey. So, I am going to be using the dribble method just for the sake of trying it, and I have a vaporizer. And the strips I know are really popular, but they're popular because they're easy, and even if there is brood present, it's just in there for an extended period of time. I have heard that the bees really chew up the cardboard strips that they're made out of, and that then can be a problem, and it's not going to be as effective if so much of it is being chewed up and taken out of the hive before the 6 weeks and stuff. But I'm gonna look into that, and I'll talk about that in next month's live chat. See what I find about it. So thanks for asking. Um, Sal says, ending my first week of Apogard treatment. Once that finishes up, we'll go right to the next treatment cycle. Junebug says, I had hundreds of dead bees on the ground post Formic Pro treatment. Not apiary felt it was robbing since this occurred 3 days after removing the Formic Pro. I didn't realize how bad robbing can be. It could be. There's a lot of funny things that happen when Formic is present in the hive. You can experience queen loss, but I'm curious if you opened the hive and saw dead bees on the ground inside the hive, and those dead bees were just carried out over the course of the last few days after removing the formic, or if it happened 3 days after. Because it is possible that maybe that was a result of the formic being in the hive. And robbing that is like the big sign of robbing though, is you will see bees like rolling around trying to sting each other on the lid of the hive or on the landing board, and there will be dead bees out front. And so if your bees are on like a concrete slab or some kind of like nicely area where it's nice and flat and you can see those dead bees, it will be like a really you'll be able to tell that robbing is happening a lot faster than when your hives are like on pallets on the grass and stuff like that. Because they do get eaten, the dead bees get eaten by ants and things pretty quickly when they are just like in the grass and stuff. Um, and for me, my bees are always on other people's properties. So I've always seen, I mean, it's very common to see throughout the year bees trying to sting each other and robbing going on. But there are a few reasons why you might see dead bees in front of the hive. Robbing is one of them. It also can be if just one of the hives was in an area that was being sprayed at the time, then that can also be another cause of dead bees. Bees, often if they're sick, they might come back to the hive, but they don't go into the hive. And so you will just see them crawling around, twitching or so by the hive and then die in front of the entrance. So that can also be another thing that happened. Dead bees at the entrance isn't doesn't necessarily mean it has to be robbing, but because it is this time of year, it's a good chance that it was. Um, but if you see things like that, like a lot of dead bees up front, then closing up the entrance and maybe taking the feed out of the hive or using something like the jar feeder can putting a wet white sheet over the entrance, things like that can help um, decrease the robbing. Let's see. But yeah, hundreds of dead bees on the ground. My my theory would be that somebody sprayed something nearby. It could have just been someone's garden, and then there were a good amount of foragers there. Uh, I don't really. Hundreds of dead bees due to robbing seems a little excessive because if they're dead, then that means it's another bee killed them. And how could those bees have killed hundreds of bees? I mean, there's guard bees, but there's not like 50 guard bees. Just like, I mean, it's not like, an army battle. So I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of it being robbers if it's hundreds of dead bees. Not that I think you sat there and like counted every single dead bee, but sounds like a lot for robbing to happen, especially if the hive did not suffer too much and you're not noticing a huge decrease in population when you look in the hive, and they're still doing okay. Top Gear 149 says, I'm in eastern Washington state, currently going through a heavy dearth. Do you have any advice on using sugar syrup? I've heard that using 1 to 1, 1 to 1.35 ratio of water to sugar stimulates brood. Yes, the 1 to 1 ratio will stimulate brood. I've never heard of the 1.35, but like the ratios aren't very precise when you're doing it. It's nectar varies, but you're just trying to simulate what nectar and flowers is like. That will stimulate brood production. And that's usually if you're going through a heavy dearth and you are concerned that your queen's going to stop laying so much, or she's going to slow down, or she has, then the 1 to 1 ratio is what's recommended. If you're just going through a heavy dearth and the queen's still laying, but you're concerned that they're eating through the honey in the hive and you want to add weight to the hive, then a 2 to 1 of sugar to water is usually what people do. Just so that the bees don't have to work so hard to evaporate that moisture from the sugar. Jane says, lost all my bees, mites, and wax moth in some ignorance on my part, waiting for spring to acquire more bees. I've learned so much from you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you've learned a lot. I'm sorry to hear about the mites and wax moth, and I am really a little bit in the same boat with this year has been very busy and there's been a lot on my plate, and some days I just really dragged my feet going out to the bees, which is why one of my hives swarmed. I knew they were going to swarm, and I should have gone out there that day to split them, and I waited 3 more days and they had swarmed, which is a bummer, but it happens. And you know what, a lot of this stuff is just the bees, their instincts for what they want to do, and we can't be too hard on ourselves that we're trying to fix everything and prevent any kind of bad things from ever happening. My son is, he's just started first grade and he was having some problems in school, and my instincts is to want to fix it for him. I don't want to see him sad or struggling, but we can't be too hard on ourselves when problems happen that are is just nature. And as a beekeeper, we can increase the bee survival rate, but we can't be too hard on ourselves. uh, that we didn't solve every problem for them. Jane says, I noticed the aroma of avogard. Yeah, it's a very strong smell, and it can cause the bees to abscond. I had put in a half treatment, and I did that every week instead of the full treatment for 2 weeks because it was just too warm out for that. Kenneth says, tip, with poor eyesight, I've started to pour the residue of my alcohol test through a white coffee filter. The might stand out like a sore thumb. Yeah, that's what I use a paper towel, coffee filters, paper towels. Before, what I had done was I had a bowl and I had a strainer and I put the filter or paper towel over the strainer, and I would pour the alcohol over that. And so the bowl collects the alcohol and all of the little debris is on the paper towel. You can even fold that towel up and put it into a plastic bag and take it into your house, show it to someone with better eyesight, look at it. My kids have these little mini microscopes that you can bring with you out hiking and stuff. And we've used it to look at ticks when we've seen them to see what kind of tick it is. And even the little nymph ticks that are so hard to see, we've been able to use the microscope to look at those. And I, I highly recommend doing that to really just like get a better look. They with like these things, they say that the mite falls to the bottom and you just have to look like that. But, there could be two mice just kind of close next to each other or next to a little piece of pollen or propolis. So doing that it isn't the best. You should really pour it over a filter or paper towel to really look at those things carefully. Um, Ron says, if I treat for mites in September, can it make my bees swarm? Um, the Usually no. The only treatment that can potentially cause your bees to take off would be the Apagard. And the Apagard, it's only if you're using a full treatment and it is like over 80 or so degrees Fahrenheit out, then you want to use a half a treatment. And you don't want to use it if I forget the exact threshold. It's in the 90s, I believe, or maybe even over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you don't want to use it at all, or else it can cause them to abscond, which is when all of the bees take off. The formic actually is the same. There are temperature restrictions on that as well. It's, like low to mid 80s Fahrenheit. You do not want to use it when it is above that, or else your bees can take off. But most likely what's going to happen is that they just kill their queen and the hive is queenless. And then with the oxalic acid, I've never heard of the bees taking off. They might get a little cranky, not like what you're doing, but I've never heard of them taking off. Apivar strips, the bees don't seem to care whatsoever. And they might even like it. Might be like, oh, I don't know what the deal is, but if you walk by that white thing over there, your parasite falls off your back and it feels amazing. And then the other bee does it. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. You should try this. And it's uh, and for that reason, it's been a treatment that's been one of my preferred ones. It's just very unfortunate that mites have developed a resistance to it, and so it's now not what I recommend to beginners to use ever, because unless you're really confident in your mite test results, you really just don't know if it worked or not. Okay, thanks for all the comments, everybody. Nice to see everyone checking in. Jessamine Bartley Matthews says, I'm in Philly with one hive that is 2 deeps and 1 medium super. Tons of bees, and curious how big of a hive is too big for consolidating, and the pros and cons of overwintering with 2 deeps. It's pretty common for people to overwinter with 2 deeps. You should consolidate two deeps. It's really the bees. You want to let the bees kind of show you a little bit how they want their hive. Usually the brood is, like all clustered up together, and then they're going to have honey around it and above it. And it's okay if the hive is heavily populated. They're not really going to swarm right now. They're really you're probably noticing though, every time you take the lid off or pull frames out, it's just like extra propolis everywhere. And that is them preparing for the cold. And the benefit to having 2 deeps is that people say that their bees are less likely to swarm come early spring. The queen starts laying in the Philadelphia area, usually around like mid to late January. And so you don't want the hive to become too heavily populated if, say, you just had one deep, and for them to swarm before you even had a chance to open up the beehive and see what was going on in there because it wasn't warm enough. And so, if you have a good population, you have a good cluster, and you have a good amount of frames of honey to fill up those boxes, then use two deeps. If you don't have I mean, if you're going to have a deep box with your cluster in it, and then all you have are medium frames of honey, I would not put that into a deep box just because everybody says run two deeps for winter, because you're just going to have this big gap from the bottom of your frames of honey before the lower deep. So then you're going to want to put a medium on top of that box. But I would venture to guess that by the time October comes out, October for Philadelphia is when you want to do your second mite treatment, or third, depending on whether you did one in the spring, before closing the hive up for winter. And over the course of the next 4 weeks, you're going to see your population go down a lot. And this question isn't going to be as big of a question for you because you're just going to see um, just a lot of empty frames in the hive that can get taken away. But if you have the bees and the honey, running two deeps is what people recommend to prevent swarming in the springtime. Um, I don't really have any cons to it, to be honest, unless you just didn't have a population. Because setting up a beehive for winter, you really want the colony size to fit the space they're in, so they don't have to work so hard to heat up their cluster and the space they're in and the brood. So if you had a lower population, then you wouldn't want two deeps because it would just be silly. I mean, if you have a nuke size cluster, then you might want to even put them in a nuke and not even use like 10 frame boxes. It's something that I think a lot of people forget is an option, is to really just manage the space of the beehive and make it smaller if needed. But that doesn't really sound like that's going to be something you have to do. I would not run two deeps and one medium super for winter time. It seems like it would be overkill. But if that is just all full of honey and your bees are just going to be able to continue to go up and up and up and just keep accessing honey, then that's better than having two deeps and candy. Then put honey there and then put the candy on top of that. And but you don't want too big of a space for the tiny cluster. El Alamo Pottery says, how often should I do a mite test? It, it's good to do one on one hive in the apiary every month or every other month, but more importantly, it's good to do one at special points in the year. When you first get bees, if they say the bees were treated, you might not have to do a mite test, especially if you're not comfortable finding the queen or aren't good at finding the queen. You don't want to kill her in the test. But come time to harvest your honey, you really want to do a mite test after you've taken the honey off to see what your mite levels are, because that's a very common time that people treat for mites. And if you're going to use a treatment like Apivar, or actually really any of these treatments, it's always good to do a test afterwards to make sure that it worked, to see if you need to keep the treatment in for that extra 2 weeks, like talked about with Apogard. They say 4 weeks, but it can be in for 6 weeks if necessary. Or you can just use another treatment if necessary to see if there's a lot of robbing and a lot of mites are coming back. There's a lot of things that happen in that late summer to fall, and the mite levels get really high really fast. So that's more so the important time to do a mite test. You don't have to do one every week, but like once a month is a good practice at that time of year, or at the very least before and after a treatment to see if it worked and how well it worked. I have Roxanne on now, and I can see the dead mites all over the whiteboard. So it's supposed to be very effective, but that's what the mite test is helpful for, to just see how it works. But it should work really well. I haven't heard anything to contrary to that. It's supposed to bring down your mite levels quite a bit. Michelle says, I'm curious if anyone is in a high desert climate. I'm in Colorado and I've noticed significant differences in my climate. Yeah, the very dry climate. There are some climate zones that are going to be a lot trickier than others. I do not have experience in high desert. Waikoloa is considered a desert on the Big Island, but it's also high humidity too. It's very dry and does not rain much and is very hot, but it's also very humid. So probably a little bit different from what you're seeing. If anyone also has experience with that, please let Michelle know in the chat. Karen says, what is the best way to insulate your hives? Well, yeah, some people do buy the insulated hives like the Apame or there's a variety of insulated hives. You can also buy styrofoam and you can make your own insulation for the hives. Some people will wrap their hives, but for the most part, what I've heard from people in the cold climates is that even if you're in an area that is as cold as, like, say, Ohio, um, here in Pennsylvania, which isn't even as cold as Ohio, it it's not helpful to wrap your hives. If you are like in Canada, my friend's mom is in Maine. She wraps her hives, and she's found it helpful. But I would not wrap your hives in much of the United States. It's not cold enough out, and it can cause issues with moisture and mold and mildew and stuff inside the hive, and it can also prevent the hive from warming up due to the sun beating on it on those nice sunny winter days. um, but you do want to put something to insulate your hive under the lid. So a lot of people will make or buy a insulated inner cover, or you can buy insulation and put it under your lid. What you really want to do is, it's okay if condensation forms on the walls because that's good for the bees. They do need water, and so they will lick the water off of the walls of the hive. But you don't want condensation to form where the warm air from the cluster hits the cold air from the lid, and so insulation goes there. As well as something to absorb any of that water, which is usually just like dry white sugar or some kind of cake or fondant. But 1 inch insulation from a hardware store is something that a lot of people use as well, or how they make their insulated inner covers. It doesn't have to be too crazy. Betterbee also sells insulation board that's cut to the exact size so that it sticks inside, according to them, inside their telescoping outer cover, which is, it's $6 for a sheet if you like to go that route as well. Neo says our Roxanne strips did not get chewed up much, and the most chewed strips were close to brood. Thanks for that. Simone, sorry. There was dry Apogard left. I did half treatments for 4 separate weeks. Yeah, then it's possible that the bees just didn't care about it so much. I don't know if you had two brood boxes on the hive. It's possible that maybe they, it was far enough away that it didn't really bother them too much, or it was really hot and dry and it just dried up a lot faster. I personally, if I were you, I would move on to a different kind of treatment. If it's not too hot out, like buy Formic, because that'll really just like get rid of a lot of mites really fast. Um, and then save oxalic acid for the before you close the hive up. But if you do have older queens, like queens who have seen more than one spring, summer, then you might want to just go with the oxalic acid treatment, because the older queens are more likely to go queenless during the Formic treatment. Junebug says, I did find the queen, larva, eggs, etc. The bottom wasn't too covered with bees. The colony seemed fine. Well, that's good. Now I'm a little suspicious of the robbing. I don't. If anyone else has experience with this, but that's just something I'm curious about. That the all of those dead bees in front were robbers. Len says, is formic acid on an absorbent pad on the bottom board effective for treatment, or do I have to put it on the top of the frames, or does it matter? The formic acid goes above, or it goes in between the boxes. The formic acid works by it's like a fumigation, so it can penetrate through the brood, and it's not like Apogard where the bees have to come in contact with it. Apogard and Apovar, the bees have to come in contact with it, and then that's how it gets distributed. But the formic like fumigates the hive, and so if you have two brood boxes, you want it centrally located in between them. If you have one brood box and you put on the top, if you put it at the entrance, too much of it's going to go out the entrance. You don't you want it so that it actually like kills the mites and gets to them. Gary says, good chat and questions from everyone. As stated, doing a follow-up Varroa Mite easy check alcohol test after whatever mite control you use is so important at this time of year. Have a great fall. Yeah, Gary's right. And no matter what you're using, it's really good to just know what happened afterwards, even if you didn't do a mite test before, so that you can see if another treatment is necessary, or if it worked, or if you need to continue to use a different treatment, whatever it might be. Any more news on the Life Hive? Very pricey, but it's a hopeful option on my wish list. Life Hive disbanded. They tried to find someone to buy the company. Their Kickstarter campaign wasn't as successful as they wanted it to be. I mean, they reached their goal like in the first week, but they were hoping for higher sales, and so I don't know. My husband's an electrician, and I'm really trying to get him to make the frame for me. I'm like, please just wire this frame. I was like, I could tell you what the temperature is supposed to be. Can we just like make some of these frames and put them in the beehive, because I really just want to try it out. But unfortunately, no. I really wish that there were less studies by some of these universities that are like tracking bees to see how long they're out of the hive and all of these odd things that they're learning about them, and more of them could just like focus on some of this technology that could be a little bit more helpful for keeping hives alive. Personally, and not to talk rudely about people that are studying bees, but I just don't understand how they could know that there's this temperature since the 70s in which varroa mites die, but honeybees and their brood and the queen survive, and yet they're still just like nobody's really exploring that as much as I think they should be. Jimmy says, here in Missouri, just a little on top and ensure ventilation is still there. Um, Probably about the insulation. Thanks, Jimmy. And yeah, you definitely want ventilation. There's a bunch of ways you can do it. A lot of people will have a screened bottom or totally open, or just like a little bit of a board over the screened bottom so that that's always backup ventilation. Some people put an upper entrance and don't even have a lower entrance. There's so many ways to do it, and so many of them are ways that your bees will survive. Um, and that's, I guess, is really the best we can hope for. Jane says, I've used a piece of foam core inside the cover during the winter, cut it to the inside dimensions of the cover. Um, what's the thickness of the foam core that you're using? I've always read that it should be an inch thick. And then, of course, having something still to just absorb any little bit of that dripping, that condensation that might be dripping in the center is still important. Sal says no insulation here in East Tennessee. Even left the screen bottom board in. No issues with moisture or it getting too cold. I may try the solid bottom board this year. Um, that is one thing that people do say with the screened bottom is that it can allow more moisture into the hive, and so in response, they will put an upper entrance, like at the very, very upper part, like one of those inner covers with the slits in them, because the theory is that moisture's coming in. You want somewhere for the moisture to get out. I don't really know if that is, a lot of this is just our speculations. What I do know is that I am definitely not using any kind of quilt box in my beehives. I have never tried them and I don't plan on using them. I know some people have had good luck with them, but I am really, uh, I mean, in Hawaii, I had seen quite a bit of mold in beehives, and when I had a screened bottom, so I like to avoid anything that could potentially be like going moldy inside my beehive. It smells gross, and it I mean, at some point we are putting frames for honey in this hive. Even really the insulation freaks me out a little bit, some of the stuff that people put in, because even though the bees aren't making honey at that point, we are going to be still using these boxes and these frames for honey later on, and I don't want all of that stuff mixing in there. And I don't really want a bunch of moldy, stinky beehives come the springtime. Ron says, how many frames of honey will a new hive single box need to get through winter? 4 is all I see. Do I need to buy a few frames? It depends on where your winter is and how much honey you need for winter. I mean, some people need 60, 70 pounds of honey on their hive for winter. Some people don't need that much. If your hive is a single box, like a single deep, it also depends on, like, how full is this box? Is it like kind of full, or is it like bursting with bees? But really, it just depends on the winter and where you're located and how much honey people are saying that they leave their bees in that area. If you only see 4, and then, I mean, that's all you're going to give them. I wouldn't give them less than 4 frames of honey. I don't, I mean, you can't buy frames of honey, so I'm not quite sure what you would be buying, but I would leave all 4 frames of honey in the hive if you're closing it up for winter, no matter where you are in the United States. Even in the Hawaii, I left my beehives with two deeps, and usually the second deep was half full of honey or more, and the rest of the hive was brood. Len says, "What is the best way to do my mite count?" The best way to do a mite count is to either buy or make a mite test. I have on my YouTube channel and in my online class how to make a mite test, or you can buy one of these, the Varroa Easy Check. If you make it, you're essentially just putting hardware cloth and getting some plastic cups. Uh, um, but what you do is you fill this up to a little bit past, like, around one or two holes in this basket with, could be windshield washer fluid, rubbing alcohol. I believe some people use a solution of like detergent and water, but I'm not sure about. I've always used rubbing alcohol. And you get a half a cup of bees and you put them in here and shake it around for about a minute, and you count the amount of mites that are at the bottom. Making my own mite test is a little bit easier, a little bit less messy, but I always just made my own in the past. You can use powdered sugar if your population is really low, or if you're uncertain about your queen spotting skills, because that won't kill the bees, but your results just aren't going to be as accurate. Um, Mongo Outdoors says, "Newbie question, the top inner cover has an oval cut in the middle, and on the short side has a notch cut. Question is, which way does the notch go? Towards the sky lid or towards the hive down?" Well, it depends on what you're doing. If when the notch is down to the hive, that gives the bees an extra entrance in the upper part. Some people use that as an entrance in the wintertime so the bees can get out of the hive, or it can just be an extra entrance when it is, high activity, when it's warmer out. Um, Honestly, if anyone has any assistance on this, I do not know any time in which the entrance would go the other way, other than just because you don't want bees to use the entrance. But be careful when using those covers and using feeders in your hive, because that can be a way that bees that are robbing can get into the hive and steal the syrup you have in the hive without the bees in the hive knowing it. RWRW says, yes, get your husband to invent something. And that thing was expensive. I was like, honestly, I mean, they're asking like $600 for this thing. Like, he said it only took him 3 minutes to wire the frame. I'm just asking for 10 frames, just one hive. I want to try it out on. Um, but I mean, it wasn't ideal anyway, but it could have really lowered mite levels. It was interesting how it just like turned on throughout the year. He's a little vague, but he said they have an algorithm to decide when each frame turns on. So it wasn't like the whole hive heats up at once, but a different frame turned on at different points. So it was just always getting brood in different spots, which is why it wasn't really going to affect drones or the queen's laying. Yes, very sad. We'll see. I mean, it's not exactly going to pay the bills having him invent that if that company went out of business, but it would still be very helpful for me. Jimmy says, my installation is a thin reflector type. Interesting. Mark says, healthy hive, good population. Sounds nice. Today's inspection, but notice more dead bees on the bottom board than usual. Is it possible they've begun killing drones this soon? Um, yeah. I mean, if there's a dearth, then Well, I mean, are the bees drones or are they workers? Because if they're workers, then my immediate assumption would be that there's just robbing going on, and that's why there's dead bees on the bottom board. I would think that when I've seen dead drones outside the hive, they were never on the bottom. Well, not never, but it was a little creepy. There was like this like neat little pile like at the corner of the hive on the ground. It wasn't like so scattered and frantic. It was like uh a little creepy how they just like disposed of them like they were just the trash for that night. um but it was uh, my immediate thing. I would immediately think it was robbing going on when you see bees on the landing board. But the big question is, are they drones or not? Like, do they have big eyeballs? Do they have a pointy back end, or do they have? Are they bean shaped? Um, does it matter if the inner cover faces the front or back? No, I don't believe so. It's mostly just an entrance, but I like to put them in the front. Um, Sal says, doesn't the notch help with venting? Yeah, in the winter time, then as well as it being an entrance, it can help with I mean, they say letting the like moisture that's coming in through the bottom, screen to bottom, to get out of the hive. And if the bottom entrance is closed up, then it can also be an extra piece of ventilation. I don't know if it being up or down matters so much. I wish I had one on me to look at it uh, when it comes to ventilation. But it's mostly for ventilation and as an entrance, both in the summer and in the winter time. You really just have to put it on the hive and look at it to be able to make sure it's on properly. But I would say that the notch goes down, and then that's how the bees use it as an entrance. Um, since there's a hole in the center, I don't know if it matters which way the notch is, because there's also still just a hole in the middle, as far as ventilation is concerned. But I guess if the hole has something over it, then it does matter. Um, just be careful with the rubbing with those. Um, Kenneth says, "Are we going to talk hive beetles?" Good question. Yeah, since it is 9:20, it's getting rather late. Um, So this time of year, I was just on the live chat with the stream team, like stream STREAM team and Bruce's Bees channel. We talked about if you go to the live chats on his page, we talked about small hive beetles because Bruce is in Alabama, I want to say. He's in an area where small hive beetle populations are rather high, and I talked to him about small hive beetles a lot before when I was in Hawaii. Small hive beetles, their population goes up this time of year, just like the Varroa mites do, which is unfortunate as the beehive population goes down and you have that honey on the hive. You want to stay there for wintertime. So when it comes to small hive beetles, I have my small hive beetle towel here. I actually brought to show you guys. I use the Brawny Dynamax. It can be hard to find them. So a lot of beekeeping supply sites sell beetle towels. They're in yellow, but they look just like this. They have these tiny little holes in them, the way that the fabric is. And they come in tiny little pieces. When I have a Brawny Dynamax towel, and Bruce says he uses the Dixie towels. They're white and they say Dixie on them, I believe, in green lettering. I like to use a big long strip that goes all the way, kind of like takes up the whole top of the beehive. You just lay it on the uppermost box right on the frames. And if you're using a feeder, And if it's a jar, then maybe it's just like next to the feeder or something. The bees chew it up, and then the beetles get stuck in it. It's good to have entrance under the lid. And then if you're in an area that's warmer out, like he is in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, then I highly recommend screen bottom boards that have an oil pan below it that collects a ton of beetles. And it's great because it's not under the lid. So all those beetle traps under the lid are a real pain in the butt because you always have to pry them out from between the frames, or you have to take your hive tool and like scrape it down to kill all the beetles that are stuck under there. But with that trap, it kills so many beetles, so many more beetles in that trap than in any trap that goes under the lid. And it doesn't cause any extra effort for the beekeeper other than the once a week or every couple of weeks you just want to empty out the pan. You can also put diatomaceous earth in the pan. People have had good luck putting grub X, I believe it is, or nematodes on the ground under the hives. The one beekeeper in the chat, his theory was when you have clay soil or certain types of soil that are even better for small hive beetles, because the beetles, they lay their eggs hatch into worms, they squirm around the hive, they eat the comb, the beeswax, pollen, honey, nectar. They start with the pollen and the beeswax in areas that there aren't any bees, on the empty frames that are sitting in your hive where there aren't any bees, and then they slowly start to spread. The larva, their feces is the slime. It smells. Once it's on an area of the comb, the bees do not touch it. They will just totally ignore it, and then that can start to spread and take over the hive. But the larvae have to go out of the hive and into the ground to pupate before they hatch as fully as adults and can go back in the hive and start the process all over again. So putting the grub X on the ground, and or some universities recommend nematodes to lower the population as well. Some people also put peppermint into, like, peppermint candies into the corners of their boxes. I have never tried this. I honestly have a hard time finding. I have gone to two stores. I've looked, Target, the grocery store, and Walmart are near me did not have any in stock, so I haven't been able to try it. I'm just curious. Here in Pennsylvania, the population is pretty low of small hive beetles, and I'm only just starting to really see them. And a huge part of small hive beetle management is having healthy, strong hives that have low Varroa mite levels. And so what people consider to be a manageable level of Varroa mites varies, and what a hive can tolerate in one climate is different than another climate because, you want really low mite levels when your queen's laying winter bees, and you want really low mite levels before you close your hive up for winter, because you're not going to be able to do anything about these Varroa mites really for months. But you can tolerate higher mite levels come spring and summer, and stuff. But I like to keep my mite levels really low because they bring viruses, and those mites spread from bee to bee within the hive, and it spreads those viruses, and that can really weaken bees. And when they're weak, and they have that parasite on them, they are not as strong defending the hive. I have taken the lid off a beehive and just seen 10, 20, 30 beetles scurrying all over the place. And I close it back up, and I squish them, and then the bees, they corral them, and they eventually die in the cracks within the beehive, guarded by the bees. They chase after them, they try to sting them. And that's what I want my bees to be doing. I don't really want to have to trap and kill the small hive beetles. I want the bees to do that. So having a healthy hive that is strong and has low levels of very few, a small population has viruses and has a parasite feeding off of them, the better. Um, but that's also why it's really important to consolidate the hive sooner than later. You don't want to be moving too much stuff around for the bees. Once it gets closer to the cooler weather, when you're closing the hive up for winter, you want to let them start to move that stuff around. But you really want to take out a lot of those empty frames that the beetles can start to take over. Um, because there's no bees that are guarding it. There's only so many bees in the hive, and the population is getting smaller and smaller. So when you have these frames that are just like pollen or empty comb, and you can start to consolidate, you really want to. Even if the population is high, if you have just a lot of frames that are just empty cells, or frames that there's just like hardly any bees walking around on them, you want to start to get rid of that so that they don't, because that's when the small hive beetle population starts to take over. They are quite the pest, but heavily populated hives and healthy hives. I've never seen a healthy hive get a small hive beetle infestation, but I have seen hundreds of hives with small hive beetle infestation. Um, so what the beekeeper is doing, feeding is a common one. I don't like to tell people to just feed. It's a very commercial apiary kind of thing to do, to just feed. But they can't go to each hive and assess each one, and they can't really see what's going on in each environment so closely the way, and watch each hive the way you can when you have hives in your backyard. And it's not good for the bees to have this fake feed, but feeding is good if the population is low, if you want to encourage the queen to lay, or if the hive is underweight and you want to bulk it up. You do want to keep the small hive beetle population at bay, so traps under the lid, traps on the bottom, if necessary, if you have them. And consolidating, taking out the frames that have comb with no bees on them is a good thing to do this time of year. Uh, and so, yeah, consolidating for numerous reasons is good for your hive. And then we also have, you can even store, if you're concerned about the population of the bees being low and them not being able to defend some of the excess honey, you can store them temporarily in the freezer and put them back in when you're going to close the hive up for winter. And then there's also planning for next year. Since my bees definitely need more food, there's not enough for them from what I can tell. I would really like to make some seed bombs, because they are better than just spreading the seeds. And the fall is a good time to like goldenrod, because this goldenrod seeds actually need a frost, or you have to put them in the freezer or refrigerator for a little bit before you um, put them outside. And if you put them in the seed bomb, it's a little bit of clay and compost in with the seeds, so that when you lay them different places, it can has a greater chance of actually turning into a plant. But that is, in areas that I don't own. This is like when I'm going down the road, down the street, all these areas that just have the weeds and the tall grass, and it's nobody's, private property. And then also just considering what I should be planting for next year, where those gaps are, and the food for the bees, so that they aren't going through too harsh of a dearth. And I really just noticed it was like early July when it just halted for the hives. They went from just like bursting to just like they were cranky. One bee was stuck in my hair, one was in my ear, one was just flying around my veil. It just seemed like it just hated me so much. And it was just like every time I opened the hives, they were just like so pissed off. So I need to fill in some of those gaps for them with food. Um, Sonic gives free peppermint candy. I wonder if the candy canes would be similar, because I wasn't sure if like the Lifesavers peppermints worked as well as the other peppermint candies. But I gotta go because it's now 9:30 and my voice is starting to get a little dry. Steve says had a bear take out 4 hives last week. 3 survived. Seattle. Sorry to hear that. I was. We have bears in Pennsylvania. I asked my husband swore that he saw bear scat in our backyard in this little area where all of the deer and raccoons and foxes, like it seems to be the spot they come. There's a property across the street from us, behind us, is over 100 acres, and the some of it is a horse farm and it's mowed, and then it's mostly seems just wooded. And he swore that he saw bear scat, and I asked the person that I bought my bees from. He lives less than 2 miles from me, and he said he'd been there for over 40 years and had never seen or heard of a bear in the neighborhood. But there's this app called Nextdoor, and I had joined it, and somebody posted a photo of a black bear in his yard right under his bird feeder. So apparently there was a bear being sighted around the neighborhood, and they were trying to find it. We are very close to a state park. Like, it's less than a mile walk for me to go for a run in the state park, and the park rangers were looking for this bear. I was kind of surprised. The state park is pretty big. I was surprised that there wouldn't be bears just in the park, but I guess not. And they were trying to find him so they could relocate him before he got too comfortable around people. And then they said they were going to have to put him down. I'm not sure why, but yeah, I mean, there's none of those big scary bears. The brown ones, I think, are the ones that are really big and aggressive, but those little ones, the little black bears. So Jana says, I just found out that my bees love sedum. I've heard of that as like a ground cover for bees, but I have to look up. I have no idea what they look like. Kim says, don't run alone. My whole life, people have been telling me that. I do run alone, but I stopped running in the park. I actually run in the neighborhood, down streets where there's just cars, and past the playground where there's a police officer that always likes to sit. So, but it is my alone time, unfortunately. I don't go running in the park by myself. But it was nice to see you all. Thank you for tuning in. And I will see you in October. For those of you that are members of the channel or students, then you will see in the community post, or if you're on the student, you will get an email about the third Tuesday of the month chat. And otherwise, I will see you on the first Friday of October, and I will probably be wearing a sweatshirt. Today I am actually still in my swim shirt. I went kayaking with my husband today, and it was quite lovely. It was like 85. But that is the late summer weather. You take it when you can because it's going to be gone soon. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Bye.